بسم الله والحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله. يا ربنا اغفر لنا ذنوبنا لقد ظلمنا أنفسنا ونعترف على ذنبنا ولا غافل الذنوب إلا أنت. ثبت أقدامنا واهدينا واحفظنا وكن معنا ولا تكون علينا ونصلي ونسلم على الذي أرسلته بالهدى ودين الحق ليعلم الناس الطريق إليك. I want to focus on how we should be training our mind, in my opinion, with regard to the current circumstances and conditions as they unfold. Bloomberg media outlet recently released a report with regard to the global impact of this pandemic. And so one of the things that was mentioned was that 130 million people possibly are going to be looking at extreme poverty. And we know that we're talking about models of how you do analysis. So basically the model that they were using is predicting that 130 million globally are going to go into extreme poverty. And so, personally, within the last couple months, I've been keeping up with a lot of reports coming from different levels of thought, whether it's the average person, the person that is hit with the anxiety point, the person that's hit with the conspiratorial point, the think tanks, the reports that were going out to governmental institutions. And these reports that I've been analyzing have been global. They've been coming from different sectors, like sometimes from Australia, sometimes from Germany, sometimes from the UK, various organizations within the US, and it didn't really have anything to do with religion or political orientation. I've just been trying to understand where people are coming from in general. And so there is a general tendency, even when you look at, for instance, some of the top investors, like people that are up there with Warren Buffett and so on and so forth. I listened to about 20 minutes of a talk that's about 54 minutes of one of the top real estate investors, and he was talking about the current climate. And I want to mention this and then go back to the point about, what the general trend is, because I think that he exemplifies the general trend. First of all, I agree with him 100%. And what he said that there's no precedent to this. This whole thing of saying that this is like the Great Depression, there's no parallel between the Great Depression and now. The Great Depression had to do with other factors. It had to do with economic factors. It didn't have to do with a pandemic, or it didn't have to do with an illness which is threatening the well-being of people in general. And so that's first that he was saying that there's no precedent to this. Second, he was being asked about the issue of investing, because you're talking about people that have capital, so they have the ability to invest. Even if the society is kind of frozen, they have the ability to invest. So he was like, it's complicated because everything is shut down. And so he was saying that we really don't know what direction things are going in. And so when you talk to people on the ground, the 2007, 2008, 2009 recession or economic crash, how it impacted us, there were a lot of things that were learned by the system. So keep it within the real estate realm. One of the things that they learned was that they have to boost up the housing sector, and so in order to do that, they really can't report that people are defaulting on their loans. So some of the companies have been taking a proactive stance, and they've been offering people like a forbearance or this and that. That way, it doesn't appear that people are defaulting on their mortgages, because the mortgages. Real estate is big in the U.S. with regard to the economy, as far as the stability of the economy. And so when you look at that and then you listen to the investor is saying there's no precedent to this, and we're really trying to figure out where all of this is going. And so even if you were to consider the fact that if the housing market will crash, then you have this group that will come in and they would invest in, even that group is like, we don't even know what's coming. And so that's just, a sign that really there's a lot of instability and a lot of uncertainty. But the general tendency is to think, yes, there's a lot of instability and a lot of uncertainty globally. But I'm going to tell you that mostly everybody is talking about that there's going to be massive loss, right? And so that you have some people are analyzing and they're saying, well, we don't know exactly where this is going 100% and there's no precedent. But then you have a certain segment of people globally saying that there's going to be massive loss. And we're not talking about the issue of the COVID deaths at this point. We're talking about economic loss in the global markets. And so the question becomes, how does that impact us? How does that impact us? And then where is leadership? Most of the leadership globally is taking a number of different positions, and most of the leadership is talking about the need to secure the people. The U.S. has not done that, and I've mentioned this throughout this whole crisis, that the U.S. has not done this. The U.S. has not taken the means to properly deal with the people, and that's because of those who are in office. And even if it was the Democratic Party, it probably wouldn't be much different, because we saw what they did during the time of Obama. And so the banks were bailed out and big business was bailed out. And then those corporations, they laid people off, or they furloughed people, and a lot of people fell through the cracks. So, that's why I'm saying that to say that I'm not here to talk about being anti-Trump. I don't know if the Democratic Party would have done any better at addressing this issue. They're playing politics with the situation, and the rich are not really giving any play. You don't see Apple coming in to say we're going to do this for American society because we built our wealth off of the American dollars, and we built our wealth off of the American taxpayer system because we use the stability of the American economy, and we use the American military system to assert ourselves globally. You don't see Google saying that. You don't see Amazon saying that. None of them are saying that. You know what I'm saying? In other words, everyone that made their wealth off of the stability of the American markets, which is in part due to military intervention in the world, and in part due to tax dollars, which supports the whole system. They're not coming back to say that, oh, the American people are so great, we need to bail them out. That's all a bunch of talk. And even the bailout that's being presented, the bailout that is being presented right now for the average person is a check. Is a check for about $1,200. It's not a real bailout. I'm saying that to say that, look, we're going to go into hard times. If we take that analysis that's going on globally to say that there's going to be massive loss in the economy globally, and if we take that analysis that 130 million people globally will go into extreme poverty, then we might as well just say, look, we might as well look at the reality before us and say, look, we're not going to sit around and wait till we figure out how this thing is going to adjust itself. We're going to start to be proactive. And this is something that I've been encouraging, because you can't do this on your own. We have to have another concept. If there's going to be so many people in poverty, we're going to have to think about how to feed ourselves, how to organize ourselves. And there's been many people that have been talking about this coming for a long time now. It's just that now the situation is more realistic for people. So the whole idea of having a garden is no longer the fringe person's concept. The whole idea of, maybe needing government assistance for medical care and so on and so forth is no longer the welfare recipient or no longer the lower tax bracket. This is the average American, the middle class, upper middle class, that they lost their stability. And the whole issue of the housing, and the possibility of tons of people going into a homelessness situation. It's no longer just a few or the poor that are worried about that. Now you have millions of people worried about that. One of the brothers was telling me that on the East Coast, the government met and they were saying that a particular agency of government that does care in the society, that they're going to have to be working from home for like another half a year. And then, another thing that comes up in that regard is that the schooling is going to be out for a minute. And so you see that there's planning that's going on, and basically they're telling the people that, look, we're in an emergency crisis situation, but we're not doing any long-term planning. We're not doing any sort of proactive thinking. In other words, with this crisis as it is, we're going to have to begin to rethink how it is that we are organizing ourselves. How it is that we're organizing ourselves. And look, I want to go out of this world. This is between myself and Allah. That there was a voice that called to community and called to Jama'ah and called the people and said, you have to organize yourselves and you have to move out of this individualistic mindset. I'm not telling you to be a communist. But what I am telling you is that if we don't learn how to cooperate with each other, and if we don't learn how to work together, we're going to be in a hell of a situation. Call me an alarmist, call me what you may. But if you've never been in a situation where you're between the street and shelter, if you've never been in a situation between having something to eat and not having something to eat, if you've never been in a situation where your electric bill is a shut-off notice and you're in the dead of the winter and the electric company's coming to shut off your electric, or the gas company's coming to shut off your gas, and you're in below zero temperatures. If you've never been in those types of situations and your only comfort has been that your bank account is okay, your credit card is okay, then you're not going to understand like where I'm coming from in this regard. You're not going to understand the gravity of the situation because you haven't faced the reality of what poverty means, in this type of situation. If you haven't been in a situation where you have to shell out $400 for a bottle of insulin because you fell through the gaps in the insurance companies, then you're not going to understand what I'm talking about. But that doesn't mean that you can't understand. You know what I'm saying? And so we have to change our mindset completely. We have to take this time that we have right now and start really talking about what does community really look like in a crisis situation and beyond. And what is it going to look like with impoverished conditions, right? Because when you start talking about millions of people going into poverty, you're also going to be talking about an environment of crime. You're going to be talking about an environment of deprivation. And so we can't depend on the goodwill of people to think that they're just going to cooperate and everything is going to be okay. No, we have too many examples in this country where when that type of thing happens, that crisis type of situation happens, it gets out of control. I'll give you two examples. The fires that took place in California, a lot of people don't know that when those fires took place in California, one of the things that had happened was that all of the food supply went off of the shelves. And those homes, California has expensive homes. Those neighborhoods with those expensive homes, they were facing home invasions. This stuff was not talked about, right? And so that's just an example of a fire. The people, they could have gone from one state to another state. It wasn't the whole country, you know what I'm saying, that was hit by that problem. The other situation is like if you look at Katrina. When Katrina hit New Orleans, the poor in New Orleans were blocked off from being able to go from one city to the next, to the point that the mayor from New Orleans broke down and was challenging DC at that time. I don't know if some of you remember. But people were locked in stadiums. And there was a lot of stuff that was not talked about, what was happening with criminality and all of that type of stuff. And again, I'm not being an alarmist, But what I'm saying is that it's not the orientation of people in this society to always help each other. There's a lot of good people in this society. There's a lot of good people that incline towards helping. But there's an element in this society, and it crosses. And don't think that this is a color thing or class thing. Get that type of crap out of your head. Because recently in the Illinois area, when this crisis first started happening, in a white suburb, white men did a home invasion to a white home. So, so people have to make sure that their brains are processing things properly. And they have to make sure that they have an understanding, of what we're dealing with. We're dealing with a level of dehumanization, you know what I'm saying, that is problematic. Another problem that we confront is that religious centers are not open. Religious centers are not open. And there's a debate about opening religious centers. So that means we're locked off from each other. We're locked off from seeing each other. We're locked off from organizing. We're locked off from planning, from thinking in a face-to-face manner. And there's real threats in that regard with regard to health. So I'm saying all that to say that, look, let's be proactive and let's stop the nonsense. The signs are all on the wall. We need to start thinking collectively. What is going to happen if poverty hits, if the economy doesn't restart in the way that we think it should restart, and it's not going to restart in the way that we think it should restart? And if these politicians don't put in a stimulus package that's going to help people on a monthly basis and support essential businesses like small farmers, because they're not supporting the small farmers, right? People need to realize that the agricultural sector is macro agriculture. So you're talking about big business doing farming. You're not talking about the local farmer, mom and pop farmer. So the thing is, like, if we need to think about people migrating to a place that's warmer, if we need to start talking about, greenhouse in the hood, if we need to start talking about, families moving in with each other. People talk about the Great Depression as being a model for this, but I haven't heard anybody talking about during the Great Depression, families lived together. During the Great Depression, neighborhoods helped each other. During the Great Depression, Roosevelt issued the economic package to support society, to support the community, right? And that came with resistance and opposition from the people. Right. So all of this dismantling of the social welfare system, that came because there were people, American people. They opposed government policy of letting this thing fall. And they forced the government to take radical moves with regard to healthcare, with regard to food, with regard to housing, with regard to work. And I'm going to tell you how deep this is. When I was in Puerto Rico in March, I did a tour of the majority of the island. Roosevelt has sent 4 breadfruit. Some of you may not know what that is, but it's a Southeast Asian. It's like a fruit. And basically it looks like it's like a potato in taste almost. It's a little sweet. Because Puerto Rico is part of the U.S. infrastructure, like it or not, Roosevelt feared that poverty would hit, so he mandated that those trees be planted all around the island. We are not seeing any sort of legislation come out from that regard, other than the executive order to make sure that the slaughterhouses were kept open. We're not seeing any agricultural package which would talk about revolutionizing the way that we do food, right? But what we're seeing, Common Dreams just issued something about Bill Gates controlling seeds. And we know that Monsanto's and all of those big corporate sectors are talking about seed control and all that. In other words, we don't have a communal plan, and we don't have a way of responding to the government appropriately. And I'm not talking about response to the government like the semi-militia groups went and they did in Michigan, that they're there with their AR-15s and the AK-47s on the Capitol talking about our freedom. That's not a response to this type of situation. That type of approach is not a collective organizing to uphold the society so people are not going to fall into poverty and people are not going to fall into distress. That's just a threat. If you don't do what we want, then look at what we have. But that's not a real solution. That's not thinking through the problems of the fact that these corporations are furloughing people after they took bailout money. And so we have a mentality in the community which is supportive of big business. We think that the poor has a moral failure and is embedded with laziness, and that's why it is that people are failing. So now we're in a situation where, once again, after the 2007, 2008, 2009 economic crisis, the middle class, whether it's the lower middle class, middle class, and even some of the upper middle class, they're facing the same reality that poor people have faced in this country for a long time. Right? I was in one of the suburbs and they put out signs that talked about be careful of leaving belongings in your car because of thefts happening. So they're beginning to see the criminal element, the home invasion element. They're beginning to see what it's like. Can't file for unemployment because the system is not working in their favor. So I'm telling you, our conversation should be what we are demanding from government as a response. Stop wasting your time on the internet and put a response so that they see. They watch that stuff. Put a response. We need universal health care. We need some sort of food aid package. We need rent relief. We need mortgage freezing. We need some sort of alternative after that. This is not going to go away in 5 years. It's not going to go away in 7 years. That's the reality. This is a global halting of the capitalist system. We don't know what direction it's going in. And so when Bloomberg comes out and is saying that the global economy could come out and into a situation in which countries are splintering or fighting each other or some sort of nationalism. This is what economists like Wallerstein have been talking about, that the capitalist system can't maintain itself. And let me tell you something, people. This is not totally because of COVID. Bezos is set to be a trillionaire. The founder, or the CEO, I should say, of Amazon and Whole Foods and all that. People are making money in this, right? This is not completely because of COVID. This is because of the way that the economy was going, and COVID created the problem already. You know, it added on to the problem that was there already. So we have to think, because a lot of us don't have a family structure. And that was the point that I was alluded to, and I want to shut down on this live. The Great Depression, families were together, communities were together. There was a communal spirit of helping each other. The churches were together. The government responded to that. There's no community infrastructure in this country anymore. No community infrastructure in this country. We're moving off of deep breakdown. We're in the post-crack age, where you have people with mad mental health issues. We're in the age where families have broken apart on multiple levels. We're in the post 60s, 70s, 80s divorce trend, where you find them people, they're on their own. We're in the time period where the social services system in this country declares a family member someone that could be your friend, that you consider that is in your care. So that's the point of saying we have to rethink things, because people are on their own. Wallahi, 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 I see only one solution out of this. The Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, when people were coming into Islam, they had all kinds of problems. They had drinking problems, they had moral problems, all kinds of problems. He handpicked people. They came into an organized group. And then eventually, the more organized they became, the more they were able to deal with those that were coming in. And then what you begin to see is that the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, everything that he did was to make sure that people had two things. They had a sound understanding of who God was and the hereafter. And I'm not talking about getting into Aqidah wars. I'm talking about on a basic Quranic understanding. And then the whole issue after that was how to organize the community. The Prophet went into the cave of Hira in Ramadan, and he was concerned about the conditions of his community. When the Prophet was basically confronted by his own family towards the last phase of Mecca, about the fourth stage of the Meccan experience, the Sahaba started to go to Africa. And part of that was they went to him and they were like, we can't handle this. We can't handle this trial and tribulation. And so he gave permission for a group of them to go. They went in an organized way to Africa. And then there were waves of going to Africa. After a certain period of time, when Mecca was no longer suitable to be a place where the Muslims can live, they organized, listen to what I'm saying, and they went to Medina. When they went to Medina, one of the first things that was done is the masjid was built. One of the other things that was done is the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he made a pact between brothers. They were not brothers biologically. These were Muslim brothers. And so you had some in a good economic situation, some that were not in a good economic situation, some that had skills. Think about what I'm saying. You had, in other words, this is like a system of skills and bartering and people putting their wealth together and trying to reconstruct the community. The Quran came down in stages. The Quran began to reorder the society, so the people were having to depend upon each other. They were just brothers in Islam, brothers and sisters in Islam. Then the Quran starts to reorganize the family structure. That's where we're at. This is the situation where we're at. If we don't start to rethink of how to reorganize ourselves, a lot of us are going to be in a bad situation. Not all of us, because some of us are in a good economic situation, but some of us are not in a good economic situation. And if we don't have that sort of mentality of seeing how it is that Islam can help us reorganize ourselves and how it is that we can come together, we're going to have to be thinking about cooperatives. We're going to have to be thinking about, for instance, the colonial efforts, how the colonial efforts, came into the frontiers, how people were coming into the frontiers and basically how they were living in homes and how they were sharing resources, how they were coming into the Midwest. There's all kinds of experiences that are there of how to survive in a situation in which you don't have the economy to uphold you. And the reality is that right now what's going to be prime is going to be in warmer areas for the poor. And I'm mostly addressing this issue for the poor and for those who are going to be seriously struggling. You really may want to be thinking about migrating to a higher area. It would be awesome if we had the ability to do this in groups. Everybody before was talking about migrating to the Muslim world and people were going this, that. Now is the time to be talking about what migration means for us as a community. And the reason why I say warmer areas is because you can afford to be homeless. You can afford to be poor in a warmer area. And if you have access to land, you can plant food and you don't have to deal with the issue of the elements. It will be a terrible thing to see thousands and thousands of people in a place like New York City or Chicago in the midst of the winter, that they don't have any housing, they don't have any access to food because they don't have the money or the job, because that's the next stage that's coming. Because after a little while, that whole shield and the safety net of how can we help the American people, all of that's going to go out the door. As soon as the elections come in and they flip, that's going to be the reality, that once the elections come in and things go to the next stage, all that whole concern about people and all that is going to go out the door. And so religious leaders, community leaders, people in general of goodwill, we need to start talking about how to reorganize ourselves. Farouk Hunter, he had a project in the South in Georgia, and he's online. He had talked about picking a state and migrating to a state, and I 100% agree with that concept. I 100% agree with that concept. We don't have any other choice as this thing is unfolding but to call the poor to start thinking like that. Start thinking about how much money you can organize, who you can align with, and that's really where it's at. That's really what the situation is going to be. When you start, look, restaurants are not going to reopen up in the same way anytime soon. Restaurants were paying like about $2-3 an hour. People were making their money off of tips. So people that are unskilled, like not in the medical profession or computers or anything like that, what restaurant are they going to work at? How many jobs can you get at a gas station? I mean, how many people can work at a gas station? There's going to be a lot of changes because of the social distancing. So we have to take this serious. There's an obligation upon us. And that type of concept of thinking about going to a state, you know what I'm saying, and where there's a strong Muslim community, whether it's, in the Atlanta region or some other region, whether it's the Georgia region, some region where it's possible, you know what I'm saying, it's not a bad idea. It's not a bad idea. It's better to keep this in mind right now and start thinking about this, even though some people may say that it's alarmist, then wait till the last minute when things get to a point where people are frantic and they can't think properly. In the meantime, for those, and I'm definitely closing with those who are not going to make that type of move, you have to organize your community. You have to organize your community. You have to know who's involved. This is the time period where community starts coming together, and because of social media and other tools like that, it's not difficult to bring people together. At least just bring people together under a concept of community. But to bring people into the work realm, you're going to have commitment from people. You know, you're going to have some sort of commitment from people to build the Jamaat in that way, because it's not going to be easy to organize people, you know, from there. But communities have to organize themselves, and they have to think about how they're going to take care of each other and what can be done. And I'm telling you that if we organize ourselves, no matter what happens, we'll be able to come out of this strong. We'll be able to be a benefit to others. You know, we're going to have to learn from different people. We're going to have to learn from the Amish. We're going to have to learn from the Mennonites. Yeah, from people like the Islamberg. We're going to have to learn from different people and how to do community in different ways, because the reality that's not being talked about is what this thing is going to look like, you know, as the economy fails to restart in the way that it should. You know, and that's the bottom line. And we should take the example of the 2007, 2008, 2009 crash, because that's the closest thing that we have, and then look at the Great Depression and see what that means. What were the strategies that were being used? And what did those 3 years mean for people that weren't able to find jobs and they weren't able to have a support system? The government has a responsibility to respond to the people's needs, or else we'll have a crisis on our hands. And so they don't want to do like the New Deal type of approach, some sort of a Green New Deal type of approach. And it's unfortunate that they were able to put a $3 trillion stimulus package together, and then they said that the money ran out, but they didn't want to contribute $1 trillion to try to attempt a New Deal type of legislation, which would have supported this economy tremendously. We're in the middle of a trade war, and so countries will begin to nationalize. Countries will begin to racialize, and so there'll be a lot of division. We're already seeing it. We're already seeing the divisions that are there. So these are things that we have to keep in mind that are going on. There's going to be opportunities and there's going to be threats. But those who stay as individuals and they fail to organize themselves as a collective are going to be the ones that are the most hit hardest. And the Muslims shouldn't be caught in that situation. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.